Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hello and welcome everyone, all you porcupines, This is your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project, coming to you for episode 26 of the Porcupine Report. As always, we are bringing you a new episode every Wednesday at 7 o'clock p.m., which you can watch on the Free State Project social media sites of Facebook or X. You can watch it on Spotify or any of your favorite podcasting apps. I'm told we're also up on Odyssey. And wherever you are enjoying this show, it makes a big difference if you go ahead and you like or subscribe or comment or share or retweet or whatever applies for whatever platform you're consuming this content on. It really helps us get out the message of the show, helps people find it. And of course, we always want to be growing the audience, helping us expand our reach as we have free-range conversations on matters of liberty and promote the mission of the Free State Project, which is, of course, to reach out to that liberty diaspora around America and let them know that we're building a free state in New Hampshire, and we'd love for them to come and visit and maybe even stay for a lifetime. Anyway, so it's been an incredible journey for me the last couple of weeks, as you may have noticed. I was at Freedom Fest for a week, and then I went to the Republican National Convention as a delegate for Maine. That was kind of one of my last kind of acts of service in Maine politics before I make the move to New Hampshire. And I had to rush back with everything that was going on with the CrowdStrike issues, with Microsoft crashing all across the country, and a lot of flights were canceled. The folks at the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, you may remember, if you are a regular viewer of this show, we had the chairwoman, Melissa Cream, on from the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance in one of the early episodes. They had their annual Liberty dinner in which they kind of rate the legislators of New Hampshire based on their voting records. And I'd never been to it. I'm told they call it Liberty Prom. Everyone dresses nice. And anyway, I bought a ticket for that, and I was looking forward to getting there, assuming my flights worked out. But the day before the Liberty dinner, I get a call. I'm just out walking in downtown Milwaukee. I'm catching a flight back Saturday, so I avoided the CrowdStrike nonsense. But I get a call. Their keynote speaker couldn't make it because of the flight issues. And so I was asked if on a moment's notice I would be prepared to deliver the keynote speech. So thankfully, my flights worked out. I rushed back. I was a little bit jet lagged, a little bit exhausted from 2 weeks of travel, but I really appreciated the honor to be able to deliver kind of the keynote speech at the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance Liberty Dinner. On Saturday. And I gave a nice talk about lessons that I've learned over a decade plus in politics, particularly in the state legislature. Anyway, I don't know if video will ever be released for that speech. I don't know if they were recording it or not, but if it is released, I'll be sure to post it. So that's something you can check out. But anyway, so I was at the Republican National Convention, and I bumped into a good colleague, someone I've gotten to know in New Hampshire politics over the years, most especially since I came on board as the director of the Free State Project. But this is someone who I remember even years back coming to Pork Fest when he was working at Americans for Prosperity. He invited me to come and give some talks at Pork Fest in the past. Well, now I'm running Pork Fest, so that's a fun thing. But our guest today, I asked him at the RNC if he would come on and talk about his reactions to the Republican National Convention. And actually, I think there'll be a lot to talk about because he's had a pretty wild journey as far as the Republican presidential nomination process has gone for this over the course of the last 2 years. And so our guest today is Chris Maidment. I'm sure I could have given him a more thorough introduction. Okay, he worked at AFP. Then he went to work for the DeSantis campaign, and I'm sure he'll tell us what he's up to these days. Let's welcome to the show, Chris Maidment.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Good to see you again.
Hey, it's good to see you, Chris. Well, I guess before we get into the whole history of things, how did you enjoy the RNC? You were there as a guest of the New Hampshire delegation. Is that right?
Yeah, but I was a guest trying to help out, organize things, we had 98 people with the New Hampshire delegation in total. So, keeping everything running on track, keeping everybody happy. It was certainly a week. But I thought it was a great time. I don't know about you, but I thought the mood was generally positive, generally upbeat. Considering what could have been, it was certainly a giant party. I think a lot of people were relieved, and the whole team came together, and we saw what happened.
Yeah, of course. This for those watching in the here and now should know, but maybe someone is watching this in the future and is wondering what the context of all this was. Former President Donald Trump, immediately prior to the convention, survived an assassination attempt in which he was shot in the ear if he hadn't moved his head by kind of sheer luck or the grace of God, whichever you believe in. He would have been shot in the head and would have likely been dead. But just with a split second move of the head, he got hit in the ear instead. But of course, there was one individual attending this rally in Pennsylvania who was shot and killed, and two others who were very seriously wounded. But of course, I think everyone at that convention recognized that we really just dodged a very dark timeline. So yeah, there certainly was. I think even for people who Donald Trump is not their favored candidate or was not their favored candidate through this entire process, there was a great sigh of relief that we weren't going to have an open convention under such dark circumstances and be scrambling for a nominee. Though I probably would have put forward Rand Paul's name if it had come to that. We'll see what would have happened there. But
well, I think on the heels of that event too, I think we got one of the great American moments in our history, and certainly one of the most American photographs. The former president, after he gets shot. Secret Service is obviously trying to get him out of there and get him to safety, and he says, "Wait, wait, wait!" And he stands up and he raises his fist in the air and says, "Fight, fight, fight!" And of course, the photographer there, I forget which organization he's with, but he's won a number of Pulitzer Prizes for his photography. Certainly, I think he's going to get another one for this. You get Donald Trump with his fist raised in the air, blood streaming down his face, the American flag flying right in the background. And I've seen a lot of even Trump detractors on Twitter saying this is one of the most American moments in our lifetime, and it's certainly in American history. And I think the patriotism and the love of our country and the love of our system was on true display that Saturday after the event. And obviously, you mentioned the volunteer firefighter, that father, brother, very, very loved in his community, Corey Compertor, tragically lost his life while protecting his family. He shoved his daughter and his wife to the ground, and then he was struck by one of the following bullets and tragically lost his life. There were other people seriously injured, as you mentioned. So it wasn't a complete, dodge of tragedy, but it certainly would have been a lot darker had the former president, not turned his head right at that moment.
Let me ask you, what do you make of it? I know there's a lot of speculation, and I understand that there's going to be some congressional hearings this week taking place around this, trying to understand what happened. But it seemed like such a bizarre breach of security that they didn't have this roof covered. I know there's a lot of, a lot of conspiracy theories around this, and I don't say conspiracy theories in a pejorative sense. I mean, people have some theories that perhaps there were conspiracies that led to this, and I think it's fair to theorize about that, understanding that we don't know all the facts, and we don't, and who knows if we ever will know all the facts. But certainly, it does seem that there was, at very least, a critical incompetence at the Secret Service to let this happen. And I know some folks who are more knowledgeable than I am on security say that this was so basic, it's hard to explain it by mere incompetence alone. I mean, certainly Donald Trump is reviled to a degree by the left that I don't think we've seen from. But when I say the left, let me not say by the left, by the political establishment in this country to a degree that we have not seen. I think any other president in our lifetimes. So I think it's fair to ask the question: what do you make of all that?
Well, we're recording this here on Monday morning. The Secret Service Director, Kimberly Cheadle, is sitting before Congress as we speak, getting grilled. And she, in her opening, she acknowledges that this is the greatest failure from a no-fail agency. The Secret Service is a no-fail agency, right? They have one job, and it's to protect their protectees, and they failed. She acknowledged that it was a failure. She said she takes full responsibility, but here we are. It's almost noon on Monday, and she hasn't resigned yet.
Yeah.
So how can you be a no-fail agency and say you're taking full responsibility and keep your job? I think those two are very incompatible. And it's the alleged suspect is some 20-year-old person who, by all accounts, his high school is saying that he was very bright and very kind and not a loner like we usually hear about with crazy shootings. And so I think there's a lot more to this story. And I don't know if we'll ever get the full truth. I don't know if they'll let us know the full truth.
We're still waiting for the full
JFK's assassination, right?
JFK, right.
1963. That was 61 years ago, and we still haven't gotten the full story out of that. So I think there's a lot here, and conspiracy theories and crazy assumptions, and hopefully they get to the bottom of it and actually give the American people the truth of what happened here and what was really going on.
And I will say, and I hope that people don't take this as being kind of demeaning to women in any way, but I know a big flashpoint was the fact that you had these female Secret Service agents who I think some have been maybe ridiculing beyond what I'm comfortable with, but I think it does kind of raise a question. I don't know. It's like, it just seems to me that the job of a Secret Service agent is to take a bullet for the president. And I would just hate to be the president who knows that a woman died for me to take a bullet for me. I don't know. Maybe that's just my old-fashioned sensibilities.
So chivalry isn't dead, you're telling me?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, it's I don't know. I guess I still maybe think that it's like, the man is supposed to take the bullet. If I was the president, I feel like I'd be shoving the woman out of the way to take the bullet for her. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know it's kind of it's just been one of the, I guess, the subplots of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, my only thought on this is you noticed immediately after Saturday, the former president's detail changed very quickly, and all of a sudden he was surrounded by all men that were all taller than him. And that I've read a lot of stuff online. I'm obviously not a Secret Service specialist or law enforcement. I don't have any pedigree in that. But from what I was reading online, and I noticed this with I don't know if you ran into Doug Burgum at all, the governor from North Dakota, while at the convention. But
Not at the convention, though. I've had dinner with him before. He was a nice guy until I heard about how much of the Liberty legislators in his state hate him for funding primary challenges against him.
Yeah, so he's got a gaggle of state troopers from North Dakota as his detail, and we were at an event on Thursday. So the final day, we had this luncheon on Thursday, and he rolls up, and I noticed his state troopers were all like 8 to 12 inches taller than him, and he's not a short guy. He's like 5'10", 5'11", pretty average height, and these state troopers were just massive. So if something happens, they can completely cover his body, and that's what I keep reading is they're supposed to completely cover the body. And it's harder to do if you're shorter than the person you're protecting. And so I think we noticed that immediately after the Saturday rally, all of a sudden the former president was surrounded by a bunch of Secret Service agents that were taller than him and larger than him. And so these women that serve in Secret Service, they signed up to give their life to protect somebody else. And I have nothing but respect for people that can sign on that dotted line, military, police officers, Secret Service, if they're signing up knowing that they could have to put their life in front of somebody, like they give their life for somebody else, and nothing but respect for that. Black, white, women, man. I do feel like you do. Like I'd be probably trying to shove a woman out of the way instead of letting her take a bullet for me. Certainly I feel that way about my family. I would never let my wife jump in front of a bullet for me, right? So that it is. I hadn't thought about it that way until you just brought it up. But that's the job they signed up for, and I get if we're promoting qualified people that have met the standards that should be met to keep their protectees safe, then I don't care what gender or race they are.
Well, you talk about height as far as it matters for security, and I know there's been a lot of talk about age limits for who can hold office with the gerontocracy that we have right now. But I think you raised an important question. Maybe we should have height limits, like no one over 5'6". So Secret Service, we don't have to recruit to. Rand Paul would be the perfect president. He's 5'6" like me. So all the Secret Service folks, they wouldn't have too hard a time finding folks who could cover for him. Well, all right. So to serious. Well, we've been discussing serious topics with a little bit of levity, but to the presidential kind of Republican nomination process in total. Now, you've had a very interesting journey, right? You were at Americans for Prosperity, and you stepped aside from that when on the national level, not the state people, but on the national level, they endorsed Nikki Haley, which you were not happy with. And I think most libertarians were not happy with. And I know a lot of folks at Americans for Prosperity who were very quietly unhappy with it. So you went from that to working on the DeSantis campaign to now coming to the convention where Donald Trump was receiving the nomination. What's that journey been like for you? What are some, I guess, how do you reflect on the journey you've been on over the course of the last year?
Well, it's certainly been an adventure, right? I mean, what a decade the last year has been. In my life, anyways. We started out, Americans for Prosperity Action very early on in the cycle. I think it was last February, came out and they said, we're going to do everything in our power to stop Trump from taking office again. And the theory of the case was that he's bad for business, right? We saw in 2018, in 2020, in 2022, we were losing seats down ballot with him as the leader of the party. And I think their case was, if we put somebody else at the top of the ticket, that helps all Republicans, or I shouldn't say Republicans because they're not partisan, but it helps legislators down the ticket, U.S. Senate, U.S. House, state houses, gubernatorial races, state Senate, everything. It helps candidates that aligned with Americans for Prosperity's mission, which is to get government out of the way, right? And that was their theory of the case, if I remember it correctly. I have the memo in front of me. Probably couldn't find it if I wanted to anymore. But their theory was that if we put somebody else, more aligned with Americans for Prosperity's principles and certainly less bombastic, then it would be good for the country as a whole to grow policy majorities at the state house level, at the federal level, and get some really good policy wins for the American people. And, that started in February. They interviewed all of the major presidential candidates, of course, because the Republican Party actually had an open and fair primary process, right? Where a number of highly qualified or certainly on paper qualified persons were running for the nomination against a former president. And they interviewed all of them. And I thought for sure in the deepest part of my brain that it would never be Ambassador Haley. Never. One of my favorite, she was on, what was it? The Ruthless podcast, and talking about how she wants to do away with internet anonymity. She was talking about how she wants to punch Iran in the face and be an aggressor on the world stage. And all of these things, it seemed, and as governor of South Carolina too, pardon me for backing up there, but the subsidies for Boeing, I think it was, to come into the state. However many millions or billions of dollars that was to keep bring Boeing to South Carolina and keep them there. And all of those things were just like, this doesn't align with the values that Americans for Prosperity espouses. And not to rehash old wounds or old differences, right? But when I learned that she might be in contention, it seemed like at the end it was between her and Governor DeSantis. And, neither of them are Ron Paul, of course, but I think one of them was clearly better than the other. And you can look at the records as governor or the records in any office, and I think easily come to that, arrive at that destination. And my view was like, all right, well, if it's him, all right, I'm in, right? And if it's her, I'm out. And I remember I had conversations with my coworkers in New Hampshire and in leadership, and I said, if it's her, I can't. My job at Americans for Prosperity was to go drive the grassroots, to find volunteers, to go out and knock the doors, to do the grunt work of what it takes to get somebody elected. And I couldn't see myself putting in, giving it my all and doing my best to do that, because I didn't want her to win. Right. So I was like, didn't want her to win. And so I thought to myself, in 2022 and in 2021 and in 2023, I was working all these hours, trying to get the mission done. We're, passing education freedom accounts, repealing some taxes, doing all these cool things in New Hampshire. Given it when you're working for a mission you actually believe in and you love, you'll give it your all. And I looked at the next, however many weeks were left until the primary. I don't even think it was that many. It might have been 8. But, Christmas and New Year's and Thanksgiving and going into January. And I was like, I can't do this for somebody that I don't believe in. And I laid all that out on X, of course, right? Which, it was on a Friday night. I had taken a few days to think about it, and that blew up and went viral. So, that's how that started. And of course, I got, because it went so viral, I got calls from a number of different campaigns saying, come join our team, come join our team, come join our team. And I ended up at Never Back Down, which was the super PAC that supported Ron DeSantis with, House Majority Leader Jason Osborne was the state chair for Never Back Down here in New Hampshire. It was a great fit. I agreed with a lot of what Governor DeSantis has done in Florida. I agreed with a lot of his mission, his vision for the country. Certainly was less foreign interventionist than Nikki Haley, not quite to Ron Paul's level, but more restrained and realistic foreign policy. And so that lasted for however long, a couple months. Got to meet some great people. Representative Thomas Massey from Kentucky came up, stumping for Governor DeSantis. We had some Representative Chip Roy from Texas was up, so got to chat with them and find out why they supported Governor DeSantis. And the more I talked to people that were supporting him, the more I believed in the mission. And I think that was the right choice. Obviously, he dropped out before New Hampshire, which is probably for the best, because he wasn't polling that great 2 days out from the primary, and it would have been probably embarrassing for him. And so he made the right choice. He dropped out. And I think if you look back, Eric, the most interesting part is Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out right after Iowa, and I believe you were a Vivek supporter at the time. And
yeah, I still voted for him in Maine, even though he wasn't on the, he was on the ballot, but he wasn't still in the race.
Yeah, so Vivek dropped out right after Iowa, and then Governor DeSantis drops out right before New Hampshire. So within a period of 5 days, they both withdrew from the race or suspended their campaigns, as the language goes. And former President Trump won New Hampshire only by 11 or 12 points. And I think Vivek was polling at 7, and Ron was polling anywhere between 5 and 7. And so if you think about it, if they both hadn't withdrawn, Nikki Haley may have won the New Hampshire primary, and we could be somewhere completely different today. So anyways, everybody remembers now that, President Trump did win every state except Vermont, which, because, it's Vermont, it's our weird cousin to the west. And,
I think
obviously
she won the socialist state of Vermont. Not to pick on the Republicans there, but they do operate within a socialist state, and she also won the deep state
the
in
District of
Washington
Columbia.
D.C. Right? So I think that that last one, I think, reveals quite a bit about who Nikki Haley's constituency is. And I do want to back up just a little bit because I think perhaps like you, I tend to have a big tent when it comes to the liberty movement, and certainly I recognize that Ron Paul was perhaps a once in a lifetime candidate, and if I've learned the hard way, if I am only willing to vote for Ron Paul's, I will only have, I'll be sitting out most races, particularly when it comes to the presidency, and he set the standard so high that everyone falls far short of it. Certainly in this race, it was very hard to find someone who measured up. But I think that there were good libertarian cases you could make from first principles on why the best compromise candidate to support would be a DeSantis or a Vivek or even a Donald Trump. But it did shock me when AFP Action on the national level, again, because there's so many great people who work for AFP who anyway, I don't want to trash the organization as a whole because so much good work is done, and this was a decision made by people on the upper levels. But it always has struck me as so odd. I remember Nikki Haley, she would simultaneously talk about all the wars, supporting all the wars. She seemed to have no internalized lessons learned about the Middle East wars of the last 20 years of Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. I guess venturing out of the Middle East now into Ukraine and the very much the provoked conflict there that our government provoked by overthrowing the Ukrainian government in 2014. No lessons learned whatsoever from Nikki Haley, but she did say she wanted to cut spending. And I just felt like, you know what? I feel like I've been here before. I feel like this was the rhetoric that we heard in the George W. Bush years and from John McCain and from Mitt Romney, these kind of talking about we're going to cut spending. And what are they really going to do? They're like going to nibble around the edges. They're going to for NPR or something. Meanwhile, they're expanding the military industrial complex to the tune of trillions of dollars in order to have a global military empire. And so it's kind of like, I don't believe you when you say you're going to cut spending. At least Donald Trump doesn't pretend that he's going to cut spending. I mean, I guess you can, but he does seem to have internalized to some degree some of the lessons of the foreign policy lessons of the last 20 years. And
I think if we look at if we look at Trump's first term, his first administration, we didn't start any wars. He started the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and I think that the biggest quote unquote blunder, right? The biggest problem that libertarians have with his foreign policy was that he just bombed Soleimani like immediately, right? Like it just without Congress approval, without anything. Soleimani did something and he just bombed him, right? And I think but if you look at his foreign policy as a whole, he was very much a peace through strength kind of Republican, but without being an agitator, and he walked across the North Korean border. He allowed flights again between Israel and the Saudi Emirates, which hadn't been done in ever, maybe. I don't remember the exact facts there. So there was a lot of good that he did. And, a lot of people give Jared Kushner credit. Whatever the case, he surrounded himself with non-interventionist foreign policy people. And if the biggest thing, sometimes, yeah. I mean, Mike Pompeo, for example.
Yeah, boy, it's terrible to see him on the RNC stage.
Yeah.
But anyway, go on.
But I think, as you pointed out last week, after J.D. Vance was named as his running mate, this is the first time, at least in our lifetime, where there's no neocon at the top of the ticket. Not in the VP slot, not in the presidential slot. There's no Bush era warmongers that are going to be in a high level of power. And I think that speaks really well of what we could expect to see in a second Trump administration. certainly in terms of stabilizing our roles across the globe and into what conflicts we're involved in and to what degree. And I think he's recognized, we've spent a ton of money on Ukraine. For what end? We're sending a ton of money to Israel. We're sending a ton of money to a bunch of other countries that hate us. And, people like Representative Thomas Massey, and I think Trump recognizes this to a degree, maybe not completely, but why are we sending money to countries that hate us and want to do us harm? And so hopefully the lessons learned even from his first administration will come out in the second administration, and we can start dialing all that back.
Yeah, it is interesting to wonder what might happen. I think your assessment is, for the most part, I think is right. It's Trump. Well, certainly you saw the gnashing of teeth from the neoconservatives when J.D. Vance was picked as the VP, because they have the vice presidency has always been like their home base. And especially during the years of Dick Cheney, it does seem to me that there's a high likelihood that neoconservatives may be in the cabinet. I mean, certainly seeing Mike Pompeo at the RNC, this is the man who was the head of the CIA and plotted an assassination for Julian Assange. They were actively planning this, as was revealed several years ago by reporters at Yahoo News. So it was disappointing to see him there. And I hear that the talk is he's going to be the Secretary of Defense, which is not something I like to see. At the same time, it does represent the neoconservatives getting a demotion from the top of the ticket to the cabinet. And at the same time, there's talk, of course, and Trump has made promises at the Libertarian Party National Convention of promoting libertarians into the cabinet. So sometimes I wonder a little bit what those dynamics might be like if we're going to be back to the days of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton in the cabinet under George Washington, backbiting and and fighting with each other for the ear of the president. But I suppose it's better if libertarians have a seat at the table to try to influence the president than for there only to be neoconservatives there. Though certainly, I hope that if he puts a hawk like Pompeo in as Secretary of Defense, it certainly would be nice to see someone who is more sensible and at least a realist in the role of like Secretary of State. Maybe he can have his Secretary of Defense being the barking dog, but that you actually have a State Department that actually is willing to engage in diplomacy and talk to other countries. I don't know. Maybe that's being a little too optimistic, but I hope that at least if a libertarian ends up in the cabinet, they don't end up being like Secretary of Transportation in charge of the roads or something. What do you?
Well, that would certainly make the quote unquote normies' minds explode, right? Because then they'd really be going my roads.
Yeah.
Which would be that would be a good meme. But no, I agree with you completely.
I think it'd be a particular purgatory for a libertarian in the cabinet. You finally make it there, and you're only in charge of the roads.
But if you get somebody that's a counterbalance, like you said, like if you have a Mike Pompeo out there that's the barking dog, and meanwhile you've got a good liberty-minded soldier as the Secretary of State that's doing diplomacy behind the scenes to keep us out of more foreign conflicts. Certainly,
I mean, Rand Paul in my mind. Well, I mean, I would support Rand Paul for anything, but much as I love to see keep him in the U.S. Senate, like. When I think of like the ideal person for Secretary of State, like I think of Rand Paul, right? He's been willing to go over and talk with the Russians. He's been willing to try to open channels of communication to avoid war, which is exactly what you hope a Secretary of State would be doing. That's of course not what we had in Secretaries of State for the last several years. Certainly not when Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, when she was actively using that perch to overthrow foreign governments like in Libya. Well, let me ask you though. So we've mentioned J.D. Vance. He is the VP pick. He is somewhat new to politics. I know that he was recently elected to the U.S. Senate in Ohio. I know, I was born and raised in Ohio, so I suppose I have a little affinity for him. And I still have a family out there who are involved in politics out that way, and they know him all right. So I don't want to give him a total pass because he has said some things that are concerning. He seems to be on economic issues more of a protectionist like Trump, and maybe not the free market conservative that I'd like to see, but he does seem to be, in terms of foreign policy, at least a step in the right direction away from neoconservatism towards a more perhaps realist foreign policy, which means he's going to be probably somewhat hawkish with China. He's not a non-interventionist, but he is not someone who is looking to have a global military world empire for its own sake. He is perhaps more interested in just at least asking the basic question of how does this military intervention actually serve America's interests rather than the interests of these kind of global elites that have been running our foreign policy for quite a while. What's your assessment on JD Vance?
Well, I think he's obviously a very bright guy, right? I mean, I don't know if you've read Hillbilly Elegy. I haven't read the book, but I
I
saw an
just got the
interview with
audio
him.
book, so it's on my list.
It's on my list too. I got to listen to it now. But I watched an interview he did with Megyn Kelly. It must have been, 7 years ago, because he said in the interview, like, I'm not in a position to run for office right now. If everything falls into place, maybe. He was having a baby and moved back to Ohio and started some nonprofits to help out some less fortunate folks in situations similar to what he grew up in, which I think is that's the right way to do it, right? Not demand government give more money. He went back with his money into Ohio, started a nonprofit to try to help them. So that was our feather in the cap. Worked his way to Yale on some kind of scholarship for or not a scholarship, right? He might have got a scholarship, I don't know. But they have spots that they save for people that didn't grow up affluent or well off, and he got one of those spots. And he talks about having imposter syndrome while at Yale. Well, yeah, tell me about it, right? You grow up in Appalachia, and you go to Yale and on one of these hardship entries, and I can't imagine how out of place that must feel. And then he, made a ton of money, venture capital, Silicon Valley. Like, all right, very bright guy, obviously. To work his way out of this, similar to Ben Carson. Dr. Ben Carson grew up very similar situations and worked his way out of that. And not to say that everybody can do that, right? Some people never escape that, that tragic little loop of being in poverty and dealing with, drugs and alcoholism and. But anyway, so he runs for Senate, and like you said, he's said some things that are concerning. So he's not getting a total pass, right? I'm sure he's going to be thoroughly vetted over the next 3.5 months before people make their choice. But on the one hand, I will say we're going to make beards great again. I don't know when the last time we had a beard at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, you, me, and JD.
Yep. And so I think that's exciting. We're doing away with this clean shaven thing, and we'll make beards popular again. And but it's nice to have somebody that comes from the worst environments in our society, right? Somebody that saw what it's like for people that grow up in that way. To have a mother that has a drug addiction or alcoholism, to grow up in an abusive environment, to have your father abandon you, to have to have that background, I think is important. And this is why we're supposed to have a citizen legislature, right? And this is why the founders envisioned our system the way they did, so that those communities get representation and get voice and have a perspective and a seat at the table. And I don't think if you grow up in that way, you can ever forget where you came from. And for him to move back to Ohio from Silicon Valley to try to help people that were in similar situations, I think speaks very highly of his character. He was also a Marine. That was one of his tickets out of Dodge, so to speak, out of his hardship, was to join the Marines and to have the views on foreign policy that he has as somebody that was in the military. I think speaks a lot too. I think, having seen conflict, having seen the actual cost of war, and not as, like General Mattis, right? 4-star general whose strategy and all this stuff, but to be just a Marine that's over there firsthand conflict. And there's a guy in New Hampshire that served with JD in the Marines. He works for the SEIU now, I think, but he was reflecting on his time together on Twitter over the last week, and he's, I believe, a Democrat, but whatever the case. So I think he's got a lot of perspective that he can bring to the table that President Trump doesn't have, because President Trump grew up affluent and, got that small loan of $1 million to start his first company, which is great. I think it's great that people have that. And I think it's great that people from lower income and more impoverished situations also get opportunity. And I think it'll be well balanced in that regard. For the last however long, we've been ruled by coastal elites, right? Bush is close enough. Mitt Romney, coastal elites,
and now Kamala Harris from California.
From California, right? So we, the establishment and the elite have been trying to have run this country, and I think in 2016 we saw Trump speaking to the people like JD Vance, not to oversimplify who he was speaking to, but he was speaking to these blue collar workers. He was speaking to these, and I grew up in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So I guess I qualify maybe as coastal elite, right? Because we live in a little bubble here where everything's great. We have a low poverty rate. We have a high education rate. We have high income. There's not a lot of, quote unquote Appalachia, right? So, and then I moved down, I remember in 2016, I moved down to Southwest Virginia, which was like coal mining and manufacturing and all blue collar. And it was during the presidential election cycle. President Trump had already gained or was in the process of gaining the nomination. He was like kind of steamrolling ahead. He had won New Hampshire already and was well on his way. And everybody in that area, like I say everybody, and I mean like almost everybody, of course, but almost everybody was a strong supporter of President Trump. And it was crazy because I grew up and I had come from recently New Hampshire. And it seemed like the people that did, or very few people did, but there were more that supported him quietly, of course, but the people that did were very quiet about it because we're surrounded by, those high-minded elites. Well, that's not what a Republican is supposed to look like. People aren't supposed to talk like that. And it wasn't the ideas he was presenting, it was how he was presenting them that people took offense with. He was crude and brash. Mm-hmm. But, the folks that grew up like JD Vance or in certain other environments he was speaking like them. Now, of course, he's a New York billionaire. He doesn't have a whole lot in common with, middle America, but they saw something in common with a leader for probably the first time. And I think that was where that groundswell came from that launched him into the White House the first time. And now we'll see. This year is like a whole different can of worms. The last 3 weeks have been, 3 decades of history, basically. We've had a once in a lifetime assassination. We had a debate between two octogenarian nominees where one, it was incredible. He didn't even know where he was. And then, now we see the coup.
Presidential debate in all of American history. I've never seen a debate go so bad for someone that they had to drop out of the race. But anyway, I'm jumping ahead. You were about to mention the coup that just happened against Joe Biden.
Right. Well, since that debate, where the rest of America got to see what those who pay attention all the time already knew, which was that President Biden just isn't mentally competent to be the president anymore. He's served in government for 40 some odd years, maybe almost 50. And he's done, he was in the Senate. Obviously, he was vice president for 8 years. Now he's the president. He's been the president for almost 4. And he just doesn't have it, right? His fastball's gone. And that happens with age, obviously. It's very sad to see, but he just doesn't have it. And I think getting on that debate stage was the biggest mistake of his political career, obviously, because now he's no longer even going to be the nominee. But for 23 days since the debate, he said, no, I'm sticking in it. I'm with it. We're in it. We're running. And everybody, the elites were saying, stop saying he's dropping out. He's not dropping out until, of course, he did drop out yesterday, Sunday. He dropped out Sunday of the 21st by a letter on X. So I have something in common with President Biden where we both rage quit on Twitter.
Well, I will say, a few thoughts that I want to circle back to. First of all, I thought the letter was bizarre. It was weird that it wasn't on his official letterhead, but it came from his official Twitter account. The signature looked a little bit more scrawled than you would typically see. I wonder, like, not to conspire. I'm sure he says he's going to come, on TV and sometime this week and give a formal address. I hope that they zoom the camera out a little bit so we can see that there's not a gun to his head. But I wonder to what degree he actually willingly signed that letter, because it was bizarre how people were saying, "Oh, he's dropping out on Sunday," and yet at the same time, you had the campaign chairman for his presidential campaign coming online saying that's absolutely not true. That's absolutely not happening. So there's been a fierce storm brewing behind the scenes there for these last couple of weeks, leading to this letter. So we'll see what happens. I know Donald Trump truthed. Is that what it's called? He truthed on Truth Social that, who knows, Joe Biden could wake up tomorrow and forget that he dropped out and it's not over yet. That's certainly true. But I will say, circling back to kind of the J.D. Vance, Donald Trump story, it is interesting, right? What we've seen in Republican politics over the course of the last decade or so, of the shift of working class voters, traditionally Democratic voters, who are often in the Democratic Party for labor issues, have been shifting more and more into the Republican Party. I think this has been going on even pre-Donald Trump. This has been going on since 2010, or at least I saw this in Maine. This was part of the big winning coalition for our two-term Republican governor, Paul LePage, who we had from 2010 to 2018. People who liked his kind of gruff way of talking, his direct kind of shooting from the hip. He, like J.D. Vance, had a story of kind of coming up from impoverishment. But I will say the smartest thing that Paul LePage focused on that was very popular with working class people, but I think is only the kind of thing you only get when working class voters align with Republicans instead of Democrats, is Paul LePage focused on welfare reform. He focused on making the welfare programs more accountable, making sure we're prioritizing them for our most vulnerable, and that we are not creating this welfare trap that traps people into cycles of poverty, rather than helping them kind of advance on the road to self-sufficiency with things like work requirements for able-bodied adults without children. If you're going to be enrolled in like food stamps, for example, you had to work or volunteer or do job training for a certain number of hours a week. And we saw that the incomes of people who were affected by this increased by like over 100% over a year. Not to get deep into the policy weeds, but I would be very curious to see. I know that in the first term of the Trump administration, they were actually trying to take some of these ideas that were pioneered around welfare reform in Maine and implement them on the national level. They got a lot of pushback, particularly from the AOCs and such in Congress. But I wonder if someone like J.D. Vance could be a really powerful voice for welfare reform, because I'm sure he has seen firsthand just how so many of these welfare programs, rather than helping people, trap them into generational cycles of poverty. And so I personally hope that whether that's a campaign message or not, I think it would be wise for it to be a campaign message. I think it would help. I mean, just on a political strategy perspective, I would say I've found that welfare reform is a very good wedge issue, because it drives a wedge right between the working class Democratic base and the kind of woke social justice Democratic base, which tends to be for giving out all the money to everyone all the time without any questions asked. Whereas working people get tired and frustrated with working hard to put food on their own table, while they see that other people are collecting welfare benefits and living better than they are.
Although, to your point, the working people get stiffed, right,
Yeah.
all the time. We're seeing it right now with Biden's college forgiveness plan, and we're seeing that those proposals at the state level as well, where we're going to forgive your college debt. And so that you get the low income that gets welfare, without work requirements, and then you have the college educated class that's getting their college debt forgiven when they got degrees in who knows what, but they very hardly end up in a fields where they got their degree, right? You know, a lot of political science majors, for example.
Yeah.
Not to dunk on politics, but political science majors that think they're going to be a campaign manager right out of the gate, and then find themselves working for, you know, 15, 18, $20 an hour, whatever it is, knocking doors and stuffing envelopes, which, I mean, that's just how you come up through the political class, right? But so the working class gets stiffed every time. The blue collar plumbers, electricians, painters. You know, I grew up, my grandfather owned a restaurant, small breakfast restaurant. My dad was a house painter. My mom worked like 3 low income jobs: the laundromat, the restaurant, and the pizza shop, just to keep food on the table. Single parent household, of course. And the welfare program, to your point, if you go back to the 90s under Bill Clinton, there was a lot of welfare reform that was proposed and talked about then as well. And, you know, Bill Clinton was probably the last blue collar Democrat we're ever going to see, or the supposed blue collar Democrat. And, you know, Barack Obama was coastal elite, Illinois, but close enough, right? Illinois is one of those states. And the working people of this country get stiffed over and over and over again, and their taxes have to go to pay for all of these programs for everybody else. And so I think you're right that this could be a popular campaign messaging program where you're saying, look, this country is that, you know, the working class is the backbone of this country, right? These blue collar workers, these small business owners, and I think they're tired of getting screwed. And if you look at inflation and gas prices and energy prices and the cost of wages these days, you know, you go talk to one of our state senators here, owns 2 restaurants. And since COVID, it's been impossible to keep up because of inflation and energy and labor costs and insurance costs and all of these costs that it takes. And, you know, he runs profitable business, which is great. But in Manchester alone, I can't count how many restaurants have closed since 2020 because of the problems that are being put into place by government. Government spending and government regulations are causing all of these costs to go up, making it hard for working class people to get ahead.
Yeah, well, hey, we're coming up at the end of the hour, so I could keep talking with you forever. There's so many things to cover when it comes to this very, very strange presidential election year.
Real quickly, if we have the time, what was your favorite moment of the convention?
Well, I thought that the Gold Scar families that they brought up, who had lost their loved ones in the very poorly executed withdrawal from Afghanistan, I thought that was incredibly powerful. So that was incredibly effective. I really appreciated hearing David Sachs, who spoke. I didn't know him. I was surprised to. This was on the first day of the convention, and I felt like I'd been sitting through all these speeches that were just the same thing after another without any substance whatsoever. I mean, frankly, it felt a little bit like just, you know, prices were high under Biden, prices will be low under Trump, and I kept waiting for the how. How are you going to do this? Sometimes it just felt like I don't know. There was very little policy substance. But then this guy David Sachs came up, and I was like, wow, I'm hearing this at the Republican National Convention. He's talking about, and Joe Biden provoked a war with Russia in Ukraine by talking about NATO expansion. And my mind was blown. It's like, all right, like you would never hear this at a Republican National Convention in years past. And so it was great to hear David Sachs. And I also appreciated when Tucker Carlson spoke on the final night. I think he was the only person to speak without a teleprompter. They just let him.
He was, yeah.
You know, I mean, knowing in years past how tightly controlled the messaging is at these conventions, I wasn't impressed that Tucker Carlson could speak off teleprompter, right? Because he's Tucker Carlson. Of course he can. I was impressed that he was allowed to speak off a teleprompter without anything scripted ahead of time. So that was intriguing. And then, of course, I know people like mock it a little bit, but seeing Hulk Hogan up there tear off his shirt as he does his character and kind of, supporting Trump Vance, I thought that was pretty cool. What was your favorite moment? And then I was going to mention
the Hulk thing just as a joke, right? But it was a really lighthearted moment where you have this celebrity that everybody knows on stage, and he rips his shirt off with the Trump Vance. And I think a lot of people in politics, in the establishment and everything, they take this so seriously. Like everything is so serious, and they take themselves very seriously. And it's nice to see the lightheartedness. Let's have some fun, because otherwise, like, you're going to lose your mind. right? If
Yeah.
you take this so seriously all day, every day, all this bad news all the time. So, having like Tucker was great off the cuff, 7 minutes without the teleprompter, like you said, and then, Hulk ripped his shirt off. And so to have fun while we're doing this, I think is important, because we know the other side isn't having fun. I mean, look at what they're going through. They're not having a good time right now. So at least, libertarians and Republicans, at least we can all get together and have a party and have a really good time while we're doing this, trying to save our country.
I will say I did also enjoy, and I thought it showed a real sense of humor on behalf of the Trump campaign, the YMCA Trump dancing video. They just had they showed it all 4 days. It was just splices of Trump just doing his hand, dancing. Anyway, all right, we do have to run. Final word: where can people follow you and all of that jazz?
Well, of course, I'm on Twitter, where I famously rage quit last December, but it's at Chris Maidment NH. My name is spelled right below my face here, so Chris Maidment NH on Twitter. That's probably the best place to get a hold of me.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on, and looking forward to continue working with you in the effort for a free state in New Hampshire.
Well, I'll see you back in New Hampshire soon. Welcome home.
Thank you. All right, everyone, that's the show. I do want to say, and I forgot to mention this up front, so I was going to mention it on the back of the episode anyway. As I mentioned last week, August 1st through the 3rd, I will be speaking and attending the Young Americans for Liberty National Convention, YALCON. That's going to be in Orlando, Florida, and I think there are still tickets available. You have to apply for them. But you can apply at yaliberty.org/apply. And maybe I'll see you there. That's going to be a great event. It's always a great event at Young Americans for Liberty. I know that in addition to myself speaking there, Dave Smith will be speaking. Ron Paul will be speaking. I think Rand Paul is coming. I wouldn't be surprised if he's there. A lot of great people. And they put me up there for some reason too. So that's awesome. So hope to see you in Orlando, August 1st through the 3rd. I also want to throw a disclaimer on this. Of course, in this episode, we've been talking politics, presidential politics in particular, and I want to be absolutely clear that the Free State Project is a 501c3 organization, and nothing that I say is when talking politics is a position of the Free State Project. It's just my own personal views on things, and I always welcome dissenting viewpoints and open conversations. So that's the disclaimer. And I suppose to that point, I will also note this will be the last episode that I am doing in this office, office right here. I've been broadcasting generally from my office in Auburn, Maine. And actually, right after I finish recording this, I'm going to start tearing it down, putting stuff into a U-Haul. As I'm transitioning more and more into New Hampshire. These are the things that have to be done. So hopefully I will have a studio set up ready to go in time to record next week's episode. Shouldn't disrupt anything, but anyway, it's a process. Anyway, so thank you all for tuning in to each and every episode. I would also want to thank our technical producer, Raynita, for all of her work each and every week, bringing these episodes to you with high production qualities. And furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.